Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to World Class Inventors. This is video number 11 in the series. And this is video number 4, the installment on vetting your idea. In the last video, I gave you a fall out of bed version of what it was like to invent the FRAM TRT extended drain oil filter. And it was based on my 901 patent, the additive treated oil filter patent. Today, I want to talk to you about how I ended up getting my 842 patent, which is the Teflon treated oil filter patent. And that genesised the FRAM DOUBLEGUARD oil filter with the DuPont Teflon as a main component inside the filter itself. So I want to give you a behind the scenes, a backside of the mountain type of view on what happened. As I made mention, I called on 5 of the biggest oil filter manufacturers in the United States. And most of those presentations were given over the telephone on a cold call for the most part. I only had one face-to-face presentation, and that was with FRAM, and I'll get to that in a moment. So Champion Labs, they were a major oil filter manufacturer behind the scenes. They made and distributed private label oil filters. They made oil filters just like a coffee packager would make Maxwell House coffee and Sanka brand coffee and any various other coffees produced by the same coffee roaster, but different labels, different formulations. And that's what they did. One of the banner products that they made was the STP oil filter, and that's the one that Richard Petty, the king of NASCAR, endorsed. The other one was the Champ, and that was the installed filter of the day, meaning before Jiffy Lube and Grease Monkey and all these quick drain oil places started popping up on the horizon. You used to take your car to a garage, a mechanic, a repair station. They would drain your oil, and they would use a Champ filter. And it was simply done because it was the cheapest thing that they could screw onto your engine. So they weren't interested in my idea. Neither was Hastings. Dana Wicks was not interested. Dana Wicks Corporation, a filter arm of Dana. Dana makes Class 8 frame rails for tractors. They make framing members. They make transmissions. Dana Spicer transmissions, very good transmission. And they had a filter division. And they made all of Napa Automotive's oil filters at the time. The Napa Gold, the Napa Platinum. Very good quality oil filter. They also have a heavy-duty line, and I used to use their heavy-duty products on my Caterpillar motor. So it was very good. Purelator, I had more of an in-depth contact with. The other people blew me off. I was able to speak to the CEO of Purelator on 2 separate occasions. I wrote him a couple of letters. His name was Roman Baruta. He kind of liked my idea. I made friends with, and I actually befriended the vice president of engineering. His name was Richard Dye. He liked my idea too. But Purelator was in no position to take on a new disruptive idea. They were in a state of turmoil. They were changing hands. They were being bought and sold. It was a very rocky ship for them. So the last thing that they were going to do was to innovate. So the timing was horrible. So Roman Baruta liked my idea, Richard Dye liked my idea, and their vice president of marketing hated it. So I was out anyway, whether it was a rocky time or not, because when you're licensing, when you're marketing, when you're looking for a distributor, a manufacturer, you have to get the triad. And that is the CEO, the vice president of marketing, and the vice president of manufacturing. They all have to be on board. If either one of them is not, you're out. So just move on to the next call. So Purolator I got pretty far with. FRAM I actually made a personal presentation to. And it's all captured in this book. This was the first book that I wrote specifically for Allied Signal. And I wrote it for the CEO. And his name was Larry Bossidy. And I wrote it for them because I wanted to give them an insider's perspective on what I had seen and experienced and witnessed inside of their company, being an outsider, an outside inventor, that brought them not $1 million idea, but $1 billion idea. And I ended up dropping this book off to his personal assistant, gave it to her in the foyer of their worldwide headquarters, located at 101 Columbia Avenue in Morristown, New Jersey. And this was a shot across the bow as I'm telegraphing to him and everybody else involved that you're stealing my intellectual property, you're screwing up the $1 billion idea that I gave you, that I gift wrapped, and my only option is like a cornered rat. I'm going to have to sue you. Now, I don't know how I'm going to sue him, but I'm going to sue you. And that's what it was for. And what I'm trying to say to you about vetting in this video is the material that I had for that book was enough to fill up the back of my Suburban with the seats folded down, where you can stick in a 4x8 sheet of plywood and go 40 inches to the ceiling. That's how much vetted and researched material I had by the time I was ready to sue FRAM, Allied Signal, Honeywell in federal district court. So vetting is very important. You have to have the documentation to back up anything that you say or that you're going to do. So getting back, I had a personal meeting with the vice president of marketing and the vice president of manufacturing of FRAM in their national headquarters, which was in a suburb of Providence, Rhode Island. It was Pawtucket, Rhode Island. We were up on the second floor for an hour and a half. I had a pre-signed and pre-mailed and pre-registered non-disclosure agreement that I had done through their individual that was in charge of new products. His name was Bruce Kennedy. I had sent Bruce different copies of my 901 patent. I brought a briefcase filled with different materials and, of course, copies of my patent that I hand delivered to each one of those gentlemen on the second floor. So we talked for about an hour and a half. Everything was going swimmingly well, and they decided that it was time to go to lunch. So we went to some cheap steakhouse like a Sizzler and had lunch. Everything was fabulous. And during coffee, Mr. Coronia cranes his neck towards me, stretches across the table, and he goes, "We've come to the conclusion you don't have a patent on this." Well, I was horrified. My heart dropped to my feet. I was wondering whether I was having an LSD or a peyote flashback, but I wasn't. It was an F5 nightmare. So I'm reaching for my briefcase. I'm humming, I'm sputtering. I go to click open my briefcase and he goes, "Don't bother. I don't need to see it. We know you don't have a patent and we're not going to go with this." So of course, I was blown away. I was heartbroken. I was dejected. But here's the key, and here's the life lesson that I want you to come away with. You're going to meet with rejection. As crazy as mine was, you're going to meet with it. Do not slam the door. Do not blow the bridge. Do not act the fool. Do not deal with emotion. Be gracious. Keep that door open in case you're blessed by God above and you get a second bite of the apple. And that's always been my strategy, whether I was selling real estate for 22 years or hawking my patents. And I've done very well by adhering to that principle. So now I'm in a quandary. I have this 901 patent where I actually called the patent examiner, which you're not allowed to do. And I'm not going to go into the rigmarole because there's a conflict of interest. You're not allowed to speak to a patent examiner unless you're prosecuting your own file. And I had a patent agent, so I was out of order. But nonetheless, I had to call E. Rollin Cross, the woman who examined my patent. And after she told me that I was a bad boy, she told me I was a good boy. She said, "Young man, I've been doing this for over 20 years. I've never seen a patent application like this in my life. You have something valuable, and I hope you make a lot of money with it." So she, in essence, at that point, before I even started hawking it, vetted it for me from her mouth to my ears and told me that I had a category changer, that I had a benchmark. And over time, it would be proven to me that that's what I had. So anyway, my 901 patent was basically for an alkaline-based additive. Now, why did I get that idea? Well, I'm a young buck. I'm pushing tractor trailers over the road. I'm wrenching on them. They have over 1 million miles. I'm thinking about fuel economy, PM schedules, oil drain intervals. It's costing a few $100s for me to change the oil. There's a huge disposal problem. And it was costing me a few $100s plus back in 1982, 83. So I'm thinking about extending the drain interval of internal combustion oil. You see, oil doesn't wear out. It just gets contaminated. It gets sour. It gets acidic due to moisture, as I mentioned, acid byproducts that form due to moisture and sulfur, and the blow-by, especially in diesel motors. And I'm not going to go over how blow-by works, but it's basically the combustion parts of the motor's operation. It blows past the ring. The rings that are on the pistons. So they call it blow-by. Anyway, diesel motor turns black rather immediately. Gasoline motor oil does not, because it doesn't work with the same high compression. It works on a spark explosion principle instead of a pressure-induced explosion like the diesels. Okay, so the 901 was more fitted or more appropriate for heavy-duty application, the Class 8 trucks, the Caterpillars, the Detroit diesels, the Cummings. And I could have gone to the Baldwins, the Wixes, the Donaldsons, the Lubrifiners, and of course, the Fleet Guards, which were manufactured by Cummings, but sold for other various motor manufacturers as well. And I decided against it. I decided to go the automotive route for the consumer, for the car owner, for the automotive, because it was a bigger basket. You see, there was somewhere between 500 million to 1 billion oil filters that were sold annually every year. That's a beautiful market basket to go after. It was around $5 billion a year in the United States alone. And I didn't go after the fleet managers and the Class 8 trucks because they're old school. They have their own way of doing things, their own perception, and it's an extremely, extremely difficult sale. Now, how do I know that? Well, through my travels, I had dealings with fleet managers, some brilliant fleet managers. Bill Ashton comes to mind of Holmes Trucking out of Framingham, Mass. That's the terminal he was out of. Tom Tierney out of Coretta Trucking in Paramus. Coretta Trucking was a state-of-the-art and probably one of the flagship fleets in the United States of America. They were left lane runners, very similar to the swinging beef haulers out of Greeley, Colorado, Mumford. They're left laners. That means they got in the left lane and they just let it fly. They didn't care about the 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. Anyway, after driving a few 100,000 miles, rebuilding parts of tractors and trailers and wrenching and changing oil and dealing with people who were smarter than me, like Sadiq Ali and Ben Serto of Chevron Oil, I decided that I wasn't going to go after the Class 8s, and I went after the automotive, and I failed. But eventually the light would go on. I had a patent. It was a benchmark. I didn't throw it away. I had 17 years left on the clock. So the light bulb goes off. I have an epiphany. I have an aha moment. And the inventor of the intermittent windshield wiper, Dr. Robert Kearns, comes to mind. And that movie was called A Flash of Genius. So I had a flash of genius moment. And it was this. Slick 50 was around then, and it's still around today. And the Slick 50 market and the Teflon treated additive market, which was in bottles then, with Slick 50 and Tough Oil and a half a dozen to a dozen copycats, were selling well in excess of $100 million worth of Teflon treated additives in bottles. And I said, you know what? I got an additive treated oil filter with alkyl zinc dithiophosphate in it. What if I switched that constituent and put in a Teflon-based additive that would fit into the Slick 50 category, 100 million plus. There's almost a billion oil filters being sold for regular cars and light-duty trucks. So I had somebody who was on the hill, Slick 50. I had the oil filter manufacturers who basically, when I called on them, they didn't have any brand new, disruptive, cutting-edge patents. I had the newest. How do I know that? They're not cited in the prior art. None of them were cited in the prior art. Actually, the prior art cited in my first patent went back 40 years. So I was the new guy on the block with the epiphany, and now I'm going to put Teflon in it. I have the ingredients, I have the lay of the land, and now I'm going to do this. And I file for a Teflon treated oil filter. That's the 842. I get it, I receive it, and I go back and I hawk it to everybody, the same players. I'm not going to AC Delco. They're owned by General Motors. General Motors, as I mentioned, was the biggest corporation in the world. They were as big and as powerful as Apple and Google for their day, except they were a car maker and a parts maker. So I didn't want to play with them because they were too big. They were bigger than most European countries. And the bigger they are, the more ruthless they get. All right. So I go back. Champion Labs tells me it's snake oil. Hastings I called just for the heck of it. They were small. They weren't interested. Dana Wicks was kind of interested, but they were slow moving. So hell was going to freeze over before they could make a decision. Purelator was in a state of disruption. Dick Dye had left the company for greener pastures. The vice president of marketing hated my new idea as well. So I was out of Purelator. So now I got to call FRAM back. FRAM's my only shot. So I learned a lot. And you have to learn and you have to memorize where you've been down the trail. It's a lot like Hansel and Gretel leaving breadcrumbs. I knew not to come in through the engineering door. That was bad. Tony Coronia was not going to go along with my new patent, even though he told me to call back. So I went through the marketing door, and I got a young buck on the phone. His name was Kevin Gill, and we formed a bond. We formed a relationship, and I got my foot in the door on a cold call. Now, this book is the upgraded version of the book that I initially wrote for Larry Bossidy, the CEO of Allied Signal. Larry got this book. He also got some CDs because I wanted to spare them of when we went into discovery. I entered this into evidence, this book. It was vetted. It was the true story. It's what I was going to say under cross-examination, even though somebody who represents himself in a court of law is a fool, and somebody who speaks so much, especially somebody who writes 217,000 words that a lawyer could stick up your butt. I did it anyway. So I have the Babe Ruth approach. I like to point into the field, and I want you to know where the ball's going to go. That's just me. I could be wrong, but that's what I've always done. So anyway, this book is the upgraded version. It's the revised version. It is written and rewritten or revised after I sued them in federal district court, after they settled with me on the eve of trial for a multi-million-dollar settlement. And it was the run-up to my lawsuit. So if you really want to see what it is like to be an outsider, to sell a mega corporation your idea on a cold call, and somebody who works their way all the way inside, and you get to see the marketing process and the manufacturing process and the engineering process and the fear of failure and all these people tripping over themselves because they just can't think straight and they can't make a decision. This is the book you want to read. This is the story. This is a psycho journey. This is my Nantucket sleigh ride. This book is the amalgamation of the Aaron Bronkovich story with Julia Roberts, a civil action, who is Jan Schlickman, who sued Grace Chemical and Beatrice Foods, played by John Travolta. Barbarians at the Gate, which was the hostile takeover of RJR Nabisco. The Flash of Genius, which was the theft of the intermittent windshield wiper of Dr. Kearns by all the automakers in the world. They did it to him, especially America's Big Three. And then I'll summarize it and say it was like the smartest guy in the room, or the smartest guys in the room, the Enron story. I'm not well read, but I've read all those books, and I was captivated, and I think my book surpasses it. Now, why? Well, it was my dream. Number two, I had 2 benchmark patents. I was a world-class inventor and marketer. I mortgaged my home. I quit my job. I taught myself to become an attorney. I sued a Fortune 18 company. I went against the 9th largest law firm in the world, Kirkland & Ellis, the same law firm that Bill Barr worked for, the head of our Department of Justice under Trump. And they stole my dream. I had the proof. I wasn't going to let it run out. And the real reason is I invented a $1 billion idea from my kitchen table and my cluttered 1-car garage, and I wanted my ball back. And there's no way to get it back, but at least you can try. So going to court is what I did. So the book is the journey. It's near and dear to me. It's about 220,000 words. Took well over 1.5 years to write, 6 hours a day, 6 days a week. I taught myself to become a writer, a publisher, a book formatter, work with graphic artists to produce such a beautiful cover. Taught myself to become a publisher and a printer and all that other stuff. So I taught myself how to do that. The book has been in hibernation for almost 2 decades. The first one was written in 2001, and this was updated a few years ago. And now that I have my website, and the books are in play, and I have YouTube, I decided to have a coming out party. So I want to teach you about inventing my way, the way I was down the road, with the tricks and the tips and the twists and the turns, things that nobody else will tell you, nobody else is capable of telling you. I've written a couple good books. The Greed of a Dime is the journey. The World-Class Inventor's Handbook, that's the how-to manual. So you have the journey and you have the manual, and now you're going to have the YouTube videos, and we'll see if we can't make a go of it. So that's my story. I know this video is a little different than what I've been putting up, but the emperor doesn't have any clothes on, I imagine. So let's see what happens. I'll see you in the next video. And thank you very much for watching. And God bless each and every one of you. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.